Welcome back to Explain. Today's topic, Mexican independence, road to revolution. So in regards to Mexican independence, there's basically three parts. You had your road to revolution, you had your new government, and then you had your lessons learned. So it's going to be kind of the path that we kind of follow as we have this discussion. So it all starts off kind of where we left off with the last Explain video, talking about long hair don't care, right? Talked about LaSalle. And so that French explorer who came through and went through the Mississippi River and founded that land that he called Louisiana. Well, now fast forward to 1803, and the United States is expanding, and it bought that land called the Louisiana Purchase from France. And so now we see with the Adams-Onis Treaty, they're trying to figure out kind of where is that border between this Louisiana and New Spain. And remember, with the Spanish and Missions Presidios system that they have there, the Presidios were there to protect, right up against this border here. They were there to protect from people being able to invade inside of New Texas or New Spain. So now that we have this United States, you see with the question below, it says, which country becomes a new threat to Spain? But clearly, it's the United States. So there's something to be mindful here as we talk about the story as we move it forward. So now there's also some oppression going on inside of New Spain. And that tension, that's, again, talking about tension, a strain between people, between relationships. And then we see that we have this social order of different types of people. So at the top of this order, we have the Peninsularians, all right? And they are the pure Spanish, they're the Europeans, they don't live in the New World, they're over there in Europe, all right? Now, if you were one of the ones who moved from Europe and you now are a Spanish colonist, then you're Criollas, right? And those were the highest ranking in the New World. And then below them, a couple of below them, you had the Amerindians. Now, the Amerindians are just Native Americans, right? But now, you notice I skipped over one. That's because if you had your Criollas and your American Indians, if they were to, have a baby or, get married or what have you, then they would have a mestizos. So they were a little bit higher than American Native Americans, obviously because they had some Spanish blood. And then at the very bottom, we see here the Africans. So even back then, the darker your skin was typically the lower on the totem pole you were socially. Now, as we talk about this road to Mexican independence, there's going to be 5 major reasons that led to Mexican independence. By the way, in social studies, when you see a chart like this, notice there are arrows, and the head of the arrows are pointing to one thing. That means these are all causes. So there were 5 causes that we're going to focus on as it relates to Mexican independence. Now, if you want this chart, you can go to the assignment that's located here on Wednesday under 923. It says Road to Mexican Revolution Notes. And if you want to open that assignment and click on the thinking map, it'll actually open up. You can have your own copy. Totally optional. But if it's something that you want to have, then you can actually go ahead and find it there. Now, as we go through this, the first thing that kind of really starts off this whole idea of revolution are filibusters. Filibusters were typically Americans who were coming into the New Spain, spilling over into the border. They were really trying to give them ideas of this independence. Mind you, at this point, America had already gotten its independence from England. So now with America, the United States, being a new country, then they're kind of giving these ideas to the Spanish colonists. Like, hey guys, you guys don't have to be with Spain, forget them. So filibusters come into Texas and they're kind of giving this idea. So the main one the notes talks about is Philip Nolan. Now, supposedly Philip Nolan comes in to try to get wild horses, Mustangs, but the Spanish government's very leery, thinking he's a spy. They don't think he's really there for horses. You also have some other ones like the pirate John Lafitte. He comes in, he's spreading the same ideas of being able to get independence and a few others, but I'm not going to get into all of that. The main idea, everybody, is they all played a major role in inspiring these revolutions to revolt against Spain. And that's the main idea. I want to focus on that. All right. They really start giving them the ideas of independence. So then that leads us to the Grito de Dolores. So Father Hidalgo, who was a Criolist, he did come in and say, hey guys, look, man, we are being mistreated. Mind you, like I said, he's a Crayola, so he's he's the highest ranking in the New World, but he recognizes the fact that people aren't being treated fairly. And so he has his Cry Dolores, and eventually gets caught by the Spanish government and is killed for treason. So they didn't like that very much. However, it marked the beginning of the Mexican War for Independence. So this is the day when we talk about Independence Day in Mexico. It's actually this day because this is where it all began. This is where the fight, as we start talking through the story here. All right, so then that leads us to after that, then he kind of passes the baton over to Gutierrez de Lora. He comes in, Jose comes in, and he's like, hey, look, we know about Father Hidalgo. Tell you what, we're going to pick up where he left off. We need a bigger army. All right. And so he goes over, he grabs a gentleman, meets a gentleman by the name of McGee, who's an American soldier or a former American soldier, and they form this kind of revolutionary army, right? And so they're going around and they actually are beating Spain. Like they're winning some battles. And everybody's tripping out because Spain is not supposed to be able to be beat. And so these guys are beating them. And finally, Spain gets upset and like, no, look, we got to stop this. So Spain finally sends a good enough amount of troops. And in the Battle of Medina, they kind of cancel all of that out. 1,300 men end up dying in that battle. It's still known as the bloodiest battle in Texas. And so pretty much at that point, the whole Revolutionary Army is wiped out. However, the impact is he gave hope to Mexican peoples that they actually could be successful because they did win some battles. All right. And so as we're moving on, then finally moving to the new leader of the Revolutionary Army, or a new army kind of rises up. And this is Augustin de Iturbide. And so he comes in and he actually develops a plan or establishes a plan that's called the Plan de Iguala. And so in this plan, he really highlights three parts. One, obviously, he wants to declare independence from Spain. All right. Two, he wants to make sure that equal rights for everybody, that there isn't this whole structure system that's been causing this oppression and tension. All right. And then lastly, he's going to confirm their devotion to the Catholic Church. So hey, we're not leaving. This is kind of this is our culture. Let's keep that the same. Now, the impact of all of this, as it says here, is that it outlined the framework for our new government. So if you kind of get lost, I'm going to come back here to a second, but that's the impact of it. So now let's go ahead and fill in our chart. And we see here that these are the events that led to Mexican independence. All right. So this is a video, so I can pause for 1 second. And so you can kind of go in and check your answers, right? But essentially, these are how kind of what you would have kind of filled in, right? Or the big chunks. Now, 1821. So this is one of the easiest things to remember about independence. We're talking about 1821. I told you guys in the warm-up, if you missed the warm-up, I want to make sure you got it, was that in our country, when we think of independence, we typically think of two ages, right? One, when you turn 18, I'm out of here. I'm independent from my parents. I can do whatever I want to do. And then 21 is like the second age where you kind of allow yourself to be independent, being an adult, right? And so if you can kind of keep that in your mind, 18 and then 21 are the real adult independent ages in our country. That'll help you remember that 1821 is when Mexico got its independence from its parent, Spain. All right, so in May 19, 1822, Iturbide declared himself emperor. So the same general we said before who had that three-part plan for equality, he basically came in and got power hungry. He's like, you know what? I love being king, right? And so they didn't like that very much. Kicked him out in 10 months. He's gone. But now there's a power struggle between federalists and centralists. And so you see here in this diagram, right below me, it says federalists are people who really want to have federal power, meaning the power is everywhere. State centralists, so federalists really want the states to have power. Centralists are really people who want the big government to have power. And so it's kind of a fight between who's going to have the power, the national government or the federalists, meaning the individual states are going to have more power, or is the big government going to have more power? Okay. And so Federalists created this new constitution in 1824. And so again, these are the big people that divide the Mexico into 19 different states and 4 territories. All right. And so then the area that Texas now becomes part of is Coahuila y Tejas. And so that's kind of a combined, if you know anything about Mexico, they kind of combine Tejas, meaning Texas, in that area of Mexico, and that becomes like one state. All right. So in closing, we'll kind of wrap this thing up. These are some quick similarities and differences between the U.S. Constitution and the Mexican Constitution. That's something that we'll kind of probably dive into a little later. But you see the main difference here is that in Mexico, there is no freedom of religion. You pretty much got to be Catholic. That's kind of how it is. And also, the major difference here is that slavery was illegal. So in the United States currently at this time, slavery is legal, but in Mexico, can't do that. All right. So now, what were the lessons learned? Well, the big thing that we learned about France is that you have to own the land. You can't be somewhere else. So the example I always give here is this lunch table. If you're coming in at lunch, if you want to sit in that seat, you got to leave your backpack, right? You got to leave something there that gives somebody that knows, oh, okay, that's somebody sitting here. You can't just walk into the cafeteria and point to a seat and say, hey, that's mine. Because the moment you leave, somebody else can sit in there, right? So as we move forward with this, the question becomes, as we learn that lesson from France, that Spain learned, hey, man, you can't just own the land. You got to actually have someone there. And so now that France is gone, now that Spain is out the picture, and now this new country called Mexico, what type of people do Mexico need to be able to live in this land, to occupy this land? Because they can't just say it's Mexico, because we know that who's coming in, who's creeping in, until they're going to come back to it, the United States. And so the idea is now, what are we going to do to keep the United States supposedly from moving into our land? All right, everybody. So that was a little bit longer video. There's a lot to cover. I hope, can't wait for you guys. See you in class and on to the next explain video. Y'all have a great day.